Well, I don't know that it's so much storytelling as it is story gathering that really matters with clients, right? Because I've seen these studies that talk about who does the talking and how does it affect the relationship. And the more the advisor talks, the more it can have a depreciating effect.
Hi, I'm Chris Reynolds, and for my entire career, it's been my mission to help independent financial advisors build a better business through a remarkable client experience. In this podcast, you're going to hear from the visionaries, from the leaders, from the independent advisors who are reshaping the future of the financial advice industry. At the end of each episode, I'm going to leave you with at least one winnable idea that you can start implementing right away. Let's turn the page on building a better business. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our next podcast. This is Turning Your Page with your host, Chris Reynolds. Today, I'm really excited. We have a great guest. We have Mitch Anthony, who our firm has done a lot of work with in the past. And, I love everything that Mitch has done. He's done a whole group of work on life-centered planning. He's really focused on, storytelling, which is something that I love and certainly promote with advisors. Wrote a bunch of books, is a prolific speaker, and it's a great honor to have you here, Mitch. Thank you for being on the podcast.
Yeah, good to be with you, Chris, and looking forward to this.
No, it's great. So again, the topic here is all about storytelling and client relationships being in the 30 years that I've been in the business, this is really what matters. This is really the fundamentals of wealth management. And so maybe you can sort of dwell on a little bit. Why is it storytelling such a powerful instrument when engaging clients? Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I don't know that it's so much storytelling as it is story gathering that really matters with clients, right? Because I've seen these studies that talk about who does the talking and how does it affect the relationship. And the more the advisor talks, the more it can have a depreciating effect on a relationship. I personally, Chris, believe that relationships are the result of the exchange of story. So we have a way of compartmentalizing relationships. We say, so-and-so is an acquaintance, so-and-so is a friend, so-and-so is a very dear friend. Right. Well, what do we mean by very dear friend? What we really mean is they know more about me than most people do. Right. So now my choices are either call them a very dear friend and buy them a beer once in a while or pay blackmail. So they've heard the stories. I've told them stories. So that's the way we sort of compartmentalize relationships on the basis of how many stories have we exchanged with each other? How much do we know about each other? And that's how we sort of graduate into different, intuitive spaces or closer relationships with clients is by being skilled at drawing out or educing the client's story. And once in a while, you'll stumble upon a story where they'll look at you and say, I haven't told that story to too many people.
Wow. And
you're sort of into a sacred space then. So that's why I've been working for years in what I would call a questions laboratory, where we test questions because the questions, they have to pass a number of tests. First of all, they have to feel natural and organic. They have to feel like, wow, that's interesting. I've never been asked that before. Thank you for asking. To me, thank you for asking is one of the greatest compliments you can ever get in a dialogue, right? Because it means they've been waiting a long time to answer that question, and no one's ever broached it.
I love it. And I love that concept. And I think we should dwell on that, is really that advisors are in the business of getting to know their clients, of asking the right questions, to your point, drawing them out. And it is a good way to look at it. Are you getting all the right stories from your clients?
Yeah.
You've also, done a lot of work, and I love this, by the way, on return on life, ROL, versus what our industry has traditionally always taught people, which is return on investments. There's such a huge emphasis in our industry, unfortunately, on, the client statement, when in fact, to your point, it's return on life. So, Talk about your work and talk about some of the things you've seen when advisors really start to focus on their clients and that concept of return on life.
Well, I've said this to your group before, and I say it to almost every group I ever talk to. This is the only profession I've ever encountered that starts by making a promise it can't keep and then sends a statement out every 3 months to prove it. And I have a real problem with that, because your value proposition is literally your promise to your client or your promise to your prospect. And why would we start with a promise we can't keep? We can't keep the return on investment promise that says we're going to get you a better return than anyone else can. It's an impossible proposition. And so the big question that needs to be answered, that rarely ever gets asked, is what's the money for? At the end of the day, there's an intention tied to money. There's intention tied to savings and investment. What is that money for, Mr. and Mrs. Client? Right. And until I know what that money's for, I really am not in a place where I can advise you on what to do with it. Right. I need to know what that money's earmarked for. And I don't want to get off into the murky waters of risk tolerance, et cetera. But I've always felt that was a goofy concept as well, to ask someone to pick out of 3 words, conservative, moderate, or aggressive, and say, what's your risk tolerance? Well, hey, wait a minute. It depends on what the money is going to be used for. If it's earmarked for my retirement, that's one risk tolerance. If it's earmarked for my children's college savings, that's another risk tolerance. If it's earmarked for a second home in Florida, that's another risk tolerance. Right? It depends how the money is going to be used. So back to this concept of intentionality. What's the intention for the money? Right. And at the end of the day, the money's, I think we could categorize it this way. The money's for people they love, places they love, and things they love to do.
That's great categorization. I love it.
Right? That's what the money's for. And that's called return on life. So the return on life definition that I've developed is get the best life possible with the money you have. Let's stop talking about a number. There's no such thing as a number that I'm going to get to and everything's going to solve itself. Right? It just doesn't exist. So why do we talk about getting to a number? What we want to get to is a place where we're using what we have to live the way we want.
Right. No, I love that. And one of the challenges I think is, with what you're saying, is it's not a challenge, but certainly it's how the regulators see our business, unfortunately. And this is some of the shifts that I hope to see in this industry. Is to your point, it's all about what does that client want that money for. That's where the risk really is. It's not in generalities. No, I love that. Now you've shown a couple of examples, some good questions. What are some other good questions that advisors should be asking their clients, like the real powerful ones that you've seen really have a result?
Well, before I give you the specific questions, I want to give you the categorization or the flow, the organic flow of questions, because there are a lot of people sort of promoting questions in this profession that I think are awkward. And that's not a good way to start a conversation, with an awkward, out of left field question that makes people feel ill at ease or like, oh, why are you asking me that? So the natural organic order of dialogue is past, present, future, in that order. Okay. And so why would we start a conversation with a question like, so 5 years from today, where do you see yourself? Or what are your goals going forward? That's you're jumping into the future with zero appreciation of their past or present. Okay. So what I recommend is always start with the past and let people know. I'll just give you a preface that I've heard people use, and quite successfully. Mr. and Mrs. Reynolds, I'm not really comfortable telling you what to do with your money until I have a better idea of who you are and where you've been. Would you mind if we just take a few minutes and I get to know you guys?
Right.
Okay.
Powerful.
Now, what's your natural response to that going to be? Oh, okay, fine. Let's go. What do you want to know?
Yeah.
Now, where are you from originally? Right. I always love to start with that. Where are you from originally? Oh, well, I grew up in such. Oh, well, tell me about that. What did your folks do? What was it like growing up there? Where'd you go to school? How'd you get on this career path? How did you meet each other? It just sort of takes on a life of its own. If you start with, where are you from? Or how long have you been in the Toronto area? and you can wind it back from there.
Right.
They'll take you back on the journey. But what you're going to pick up in that is you're going to pick up their career formation, their family formation, their personal formation, right? Like how did they get to where they are? And people love to tell that story. They really do.
Yeah.
Now, once you've gotten an idea of their sort of personal biography, I like to shift into gear number 2 and say to people, I also find it to be very helpful to learn about your financial experience. Would you mind if I asked you a couple of questions about your financial experiences? And what we're doing here is we're always getting permission to ask.
Right.
I've got this concept called the listening ear. And EAR is an acronym. And the E is establish context. Tell me why you're asking before you ask.
Right.
Then no one's ever uncomfortable with the question. Right. So how did I do that? I said, I'm not comfortable telling you what to do with your money until I have a better idea of who you are and where you've been. I just established context. I now ask the question. That's the A in EAR. And then the R is I respond reflectively. Once I hear your answer or hear your story, say, based on the story you told me, I wonder if it wouldn't behoove us to look at the following. Right. I'm tying your story to the strategy I'm going to present to you. So gear 1 is let's just learn about your personal biography. But gear number 2 is I want to know your financial experience. And there's a couple, 3 questions I love to throw out here. 1, what was money like growing up?
That's a great question. Absolutely.
People love that question.
Yeah.
I always tell advisors, if you want to have a client event and put people around tables at a dinner and start a really great conversation, use that. They love to share their story of what money was like growing up. And even sometimes they didn't have any money. Sometimes their parents had a lot of money, but it got in the way, or there's always a story there. Or an answer I've heard 1,000 times is, we didn't have anything, but we didn't know it.
Right.
Right. That sort of story.
Yeah.
We were a happy home, and we didn't know that we didn't have as much as other people had, blah, blah, blah. But anyway, they love to tell a story. Another question I like to throw in is, tell me, what would you describe as your best and worst financial experience so far?
That's a great one too. Absolutely.
And that's not, and note that I didn't ask what's your best and worst investment experience. What's your best and worst financial experience? So, one of the things we want to do is we want to be careful that we don't paint ourselves into an investment corner where the only thing they want to talk to us about is investments. We want to have a planning conversation. Right. We want to have a broad conversation. And the way you broaden the conversation is by opening up with questions like that. And then the third question I recommend is, have you had any experiences with any other financial professionals, either good or bad, that would be worth your time to tell me about?
Yes.
And what you're doing here is a mind sweep. Because there's a lot of people, Chris, walking around out there with what I call post-traumatic advisor syndrome.
Okay. Yes, there is.
They've been sold something and it didn't go well. And by the way, they need to purge that particular story. They need to ventilate that story. And I remember one advisor said to me, he said, every time I ask that question, he said, after they give me the answer, they say to me, thank you for asking. Like they needed to tell that story.
Right. They've been holding that one in for quite a while.
Yep. Yeah. So you start with the history, and then you come into the present, and then you work your way to the future. But you don't start with the future.
Right. Actually, I think that is fantastic advice, is because, that is sort of something that, again, you're taught in the wealth management business. Always, point them to the future and do all the projections and throw a whole bunch of numbers at them where, if there's no context to it, how can you possibly give them any advice?
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, and here's the deal. Here's what I challenge advisors with. Who's your client? The assets or the person?
Right. And that's fundamentally right there.
Okay. So let's learn about the person before we start focusing on the assets.
No, very good. Now, one of the things, and I know that you've talked to our group about it, and certainly we've tried to take it, and I've seen it on your website. There's 3 powerful forces that basically influence the movement of money, whether it's going to you or going away from you. And maybe you can elaborate on some of those forces and some great examples so that our listeners can say, yep, I should be doing that, or no, I shouldn't be doing that.
Well, the three forces that I talk about that influence the movement of money are an intellectual force, a force of life, and a psychological, emotional force.
Right.
The intellectual force is curiosity. How interested are you to know the story of the person sitting across from you?
Right.
And because that's going to make or break this relationship. And if you're just curious on the surface and not really curious to know what makes them unique, then you're only going to go so far in that situation with that person. And the people who are really great at this business, they're just naturally curious. The people that are really great in any business are naturally curious people. They just have to know more, right? And they're not going to stop until they learn what they want to learn. And I've always come at other human beings with the idea, every person's unique, and I want to know what makes this person unique. Right. And I'm going to keep prying until I know. Right.
Yeah. So you're
and
certain.
And it's always, and their uniqueness, their unique design is found in their story.
Right.
The force of life that I talk about are life transitions. Like what's happening in your life right now that could impact your financial future. Right. And this profession at large would like to pretend there's three life transitions: a kid going to college, you retiring, and somebody dying. But there are a lot more transitions. I've studied transitions as much as anybody on this planet. And I can tell you for a fact, there's over 60 life transitions from the cradle to the grave. And every one of them implicates money, right? So money is impacted by these life transitions. And so the law of life, the economic law of life that I teach, Chris, is money goes in motion when life goes in transition. So it's the life transition that causes the money to move. Okay. Well, everyone in the money business is chasing money in motion. Like, oh, they're going to retire. We want to make sure we capture those retirement assets. So then they start that conversation. Well, they start it too late because when you should have started the conversation, I saw a study on retirement, for example, said, when should you start the retirement conversation if you want to ensure that money is going to move toward you, not away from you? And the answer was 4.5 years before the transition.
4.5. Okay. Yep.
Okay. So here's the deal. It's cause and effect. The cause is life transition. The effect is money in motion. You don't chase the effect, you address the cause. A very simple question you could ask clients every year is there anything going on in your life right now or that you see coming that could have a major impact on your financial future?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. They're going to tell you about selling the business or changing their career, or somebody, a family member got sick and they're helping them out. There's all these things going on that are impacting people financially. And advisors, by and large, are not privy to those things that are going on because they're not asking that sort of question. Right. So I've developed a tool called the Financial Lifeline, where we sit down with a client and we literally chart out for the next 10 to 20 years, every transition that they see coming. There's only two types of transitions: those you see coming and those you don't.
True, absolutely.
Okay. And the ones we see coming, we need to have them up on the board, so to speak, and have a plan in place, because it's better to prepare than it is to repair. This is what we want to tell the client. We don't want to wait for this to happen to come up with a plan. We want to have a plan in place before it happens. And then the clients figures out, once you've had that conversation about their life transitions, they figure out they need to call you when something changes.
Right. Yeah.
I remember one very famous advisor here in the States told me, he said, after I started this process, people told me, you just moved up to number 2 on my call list. Right.
Yeah.
Which is amazing, right? Because they realize I need to tell my advisor that something major is changing.
Right.
So it can be addressed in my plan. So that's the force of life. Life transitions are the force of life that cause money to move. And then the third force, the emotional force, is empathy. And empathy is when I know that you know me.
Right.
Or I know that you get me.
Right.
And the only way empathy is formed is by me sharing a story with you that's meaningful. And the only way that happens is that you ask me a question about me or my life that opened the door for me to tell that story.
Right. That gives me permission to do that.
Yeah. Empathy is not an accident.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And so it's something that happens when we ask questions that open up the door for them to tell a meaningful story.
Right. No, very powerful stuff. So this time I go into what I call my rapid fire questions. So just some interactions you've had. So first of all, Mitch, what do you love doing? What do you truly love doing? What would you do even if you weren't getting paid?
This.
See, I was hoping that was the answer, because one of my other questions was, why haven't you retired? But I think you just answered that question.
It's not on my board.
Exactly. That's not it just yet. And how about, what is your most memorable, whether it's outcome or result of work with an advisor? What's the one thing that really stands out that comes to your mind first time I ask you that question?
You know, I've had this experience a few times, but I just had it last month. I was in Philadelphia speaking at the Philadelphia FPA, and a gentleman walked up to me and he said, a year ago today, I was ready to quit this business. I didn't like it anymore. I was tired of the approach that our company was taking, and I just didn't want to do it. And he said, I read your book, Life-Centered Financial Planning. And he said, I decided to start asking those questions, right? He said, in the last year, I've added $100 million in AUM.
Wow.
And he said, the only thing that changed were the questions I was asking. Now the fact that he loved what he's doing again, I mean, that's the beauty of it. People know when they're dealing with somebody that loves what they do.
Right. Absolutely.
They know, right. Yeah. So for me, it doesn't get any better than that. I don't care that he added 100 million AUM, but it's just proof of the pudding, right? That if you do the right thing, it just attracts money.
Absolutely. And if you're passionate, it shows. Right? So to your point, once you love what you do, you don't really have a job anymore.
Right.
And the last one, and I always get some great answers on this one, what's the best piece of advice that you've ever received?
Oh, that's an easy question.
Easy one.
So I was 19 years old. I was in a church meeting with about 500 young people, and this preacher got up and he said, I'm going to give you 7 words. And if you follow these 7 words, you'll never lack for purpose in your life. And I grabbed my pen, got my paper poised, and he said, here's the 7 words. Find a need and meet that need. And he said, now, here's the twist. You need to understand. The need you find is going to be different than the need the person on your right and left finds, because your eyes are tuned to see certain things. Your ears are tuned to hear certain things. Your heart is tuned to feel certain things. So pay attention to what you see, pay attention to what you hear, and pay attention to what you feel as you watch life go on around you. And that was it. Once I learned that, the first thing I found was a suicide crisis going on with farmers in Iowa. I was from Iowa originally, and they were losing their farms and hanging themselves in the loft of their barn, right? Oh. Yeah, it was horrible. And I researched the state and found there was not one suicide prevention service, not one crisis counseling service, nothing for farmers, right? So I started one. I found a need.
Fantastic.
And we met the need. Well, and it's like, it just kept moving. The need, I'd find a new need and create a solution. That's how I ended up in financial services. And I can't get out of financial services because there's so many needs.
I was going to say the needs that you have here are abundant, obviously. So thank you very much, Mitch. This was fantastic. My final rant on Mitch's talk is that it's everything I believe in. This business is about helping people, and you can't help people until you really know their story, until you know what they are, until you know what the money's for. And that is critical in our business. And too much of it is, to your point, whether it's regulatory or answering questionnaires or trying to find risk or, focusing on the return. I'm not going to say that's unimportant, but it's not as important as the actual person and what they want to achieve. Mitch, if somebody wanted to get more information from you on some of the programs that you have, how would they go about that? Like, again, it's been great. And as I said, we're big followers of you at IPC. So, anything you want to post or anything that we can follow?
If MitchAnthony.com, if you want to learn about the books or the talks, and if you want to learn about life-centered planning, go to ROLAdvisor.com. That's returnonlifeadvisor.com.
Thank you. So we've had Mitch Anthony here, all on the Return on Life. Thank you very much for joining this episode of Turning Your Page. I'm your host, Chris Reynolds, and I hope to see you soon in future broadcasts. And if you have any good comments about what you heard today, go down the comment section. Let us know what you think, and let us know if you have any questions, and I'm sure I can pass them on to Mitch. Once again, thank you, Mitch, for giving us your time today. I know our listeners are going to love it. Have a great one. So if you've liked what you've heard today, do us a favor and hit subscribe. That way you'll find another episode and another actionable takeaway on how to keep building a better business.